welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial, California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez, on trial for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose. We are on trial two because their first trial, which took place in 1993, ended in a mistrial after weeks and weeks of deliberations. And so each brother had their own set of jurors, and both juries decided, more than half of both juries decided that they wanted to acquit, but unfortunately, it both ended in a mistrial. Um, and then we had the OJ case, and he was acquitted. So, same DA's office went very hard on the brothers a second time, almost as if to try to get a conviction. So, that's kind of where we're at. And we are going through testimony today. This is voiceover only, by the way. Just to give you a little idea, I have an older German Shepherd. She's got a little bit of hip dysplasia. She's having issues with her hips today, and so I didn't want to be upstairs and making her go up and down the stairs with me. So I'm out of my normal place of recording, so I'm downstairs and just video off. But this is gonna be audio only. We'll still get through the testimony. But first, so like I said, we're going to go over Sergeant Edmonds' testimony. He responded to the scene, spoke with the brothers the night of the homicides, shortly after Lyle and Erik called 911. Well, Lyle called 911, but they were together. So before we get started, though, I did want to give you guys some good news. This is going on with the brothers' clemency request. So actually, I'm gonna play you guys a record or a video. This is of Gavin Newsom discussing resentencing for it. Not even resentencing. This would be like the first step to clemency, to being released, I believe. So this is he's asking for a risk assessment.
So we're getting a lot of questions, a lot of calls about something that's getting a lot of attention, unsurprisingly, and that's what's going on with the Menendez brothers.
First of all, I just want to say it is a blurry video. I can't really do much about it, and there's like a lot of pop-up ads on this channel, or not channel, but website that I'm on, and it's making this video very slow and annoying. But this is what we have. This is on the TMZ website, and we'll read the article too, but I wanted to play you the video. But his voice, doesn't it sound really raspy?
Just a quick update. Today, I just notified the LA DA as well as the Menendez attorney, including victims, that I have directed the Board of Parole hearings to do what we call a risk assessment investigation into their applications, specifically for commutation. The question for the board is a rather simple one. Do Erik and Lyle Menendez, do they pose a current, what we call unreasonable risk to public safety? The risk assessment will be conducted as
God, these pop-up ads. It's like I close one and then another one just pops up and whoops. See, I'm trying to close them and then I click on them. Sorry, this is a bad website.
they typically are conducted by experts in public safety as well as forensic psychologists.
All right, let's rewind that a little bit because it keeps freezing.
As they typically are conducted by.
Oh my God,
for the
stop
board
it.
is a rather simple one. Do Erik and Lyle Menendez, do they pose a current, what we call unreasonable risk to public safety? The risk assessment.
Okay, this is not working. I apologize. This is annoying me. I've tried playing this, I don't know how many times. This website sucks. Okay, let's let's just read the article. I will try to link it in the description below so you can read or go listen to his announcement. So frustrating. Okay, Governor Gavin Newsom is ordering an investigation into whether Eric and Lyle Menendez are fit to return to public life. TMZ has learned, and he says it's a critical first step before he or anyone else can decide if they get out of prison. This is a major, unexpected development in the Menendez brothers' fight for freedom. It seemed the governor was going to take a back seat until the courts ruled on Eric and Lyle's fate, but all that has now changed. I wonder if public pressure has been getting to them, because especially after the DA's press release last week, perhaps there might have been a lot of backlash on his basically his interpretation of the crime. He made it as gruesome as possible, making the brothers seem as heartless and thoughtless as possible, and totally disregarding everything that they had gone through in the Menendez home, living under that roof with completely abusive parents. Parents, plural. So yeah. So maybe the governor got a little bit of backlash. I'm not sure, but let's go on. California governor tells us he's directing the Board of Parole hearings to conduct a risk assessment investigation on the Menendez brothers, which he says is their version of a parole hearing. But before the board weighs in, a comprehensive risk assessment must be done. Newsom says experts will analyze what led each brother to commit their offense and if they had done the transformational work needed, which they both have done, and gained the skills to avoid repeating their mistakes. I have a post scheduled coming up. I can't remember what day I scheduled it for, but there's a post coming up where on X that I have shared the resentencing. We've gone through the resentencing filing, but I shared it, and it is also in the link below. I'll show you in a minute. Um, you'll see I have all the filings in a Google folder for you guys to download anytime. All right, so the governor's initiative comes 1 week after Lyle and Erik appeared on TMZ's Two Angry Men podcast, speaking with Harvey and Mark Garagos, their attorney, about their lives during incarceration, including several programs they've launched to better the lives of their fellow inmates. It's, oh, you stupid website. Sorry. It sounds like all that information will be factored into Newsom's decision, along with the risk assessment, which will help him determine just how rehabilitated the Menendez brothers are after 35 years in prison and ultimately whether he should commute their sentences. That's one path to release, but the governor says the investigation results will also be shared with the Board of Parole and the judge deciding whether they get resentenced, which is their other potential path to freedom, which we've talked about extensively too. So, once the risk assessment is complete, which will take a few months, Newsom says there will be a hearing, sorry. Blah, blah, blah. Newsom says there will be a hearing that works like a standard parole hearing, providing the district attorney and the victims a chance to be a part of the process. And that is where their resentencing memo, which I forgot to point out, um, go take a, go relook at that if you have looked at it before or gone over it with me, or if you are looking at it for the first time, I would recommend looking at it and see all the good that they did that they have done in prison and all the programs that they've started. Oh, hold on, I got a timer. Sorry, I had an alarm set. I had to go do something. I don't remember where I left off, so let me restart this sentence here. Once the risk assessment is complete, which will take a few months, Newsom says there will be a hearing that works like a standard parole hearing, providing the district attorney and the victims a chance to be a part of the process. So the victims Eric and Lyle will get a chance to speak about their risk assessment and recidivism rate, um, which is considered to be quite low if you look at the resentencing motion that I have linked. All right, so LA County DA Nathan Hochman made it clear last week that he's opposed to the Menendez brothers getting a new trial, but he told us on TMZ Live that he's open to the possibility of them getting resentenced. Again, I think that's coming from all of the backlash he got from his press conference. Meanwhile, the governor's office says this process doesn't mean there's any guaranteed outcome, but it shows the governor is doing his due diligence, ensuring transparency, keeping public safety at the forefront, making sure the process is fair for everyone involved, and getting closer to a conclusion. So that is good news for the brothers, and they will get to possibly go in front of a parole board if necessary. Maybe they'll even get clemency without. Hopefully. That would be something, wouldn't it? All right, I want to remind you before we get started with our script reading. So there's a link for the witness timeline or the witness testimony. It's a timeline of everybody who testifies throughout the trial. I updated it and added week 3. We're going to have some polls coming up, so be ready for that. Let's see. So we are going to read today Sergeant Edmonds. We're on week 2, October 17th through the 18th. We're going to read his testimony. He interviewed the brothers again. As a reminder, Gil Garcetti is the DA. We don't really hear from him, but we hear from Carol Najera, and David Kahn, who are representing the people of California. Lyle Menendez's attorneys are Michael Judge, Charles Gessler, and Terry Towery. Then we have Eric Menendez's attorneys, who are as Leslie Abramson, who is returning from trial 1, the only attorney returning from trial 1, and Barry Levin, who is also representing Eric. Then we have Stanley Weisberg, same judge as in the first trial. So he actually overturned some of his rulings and doesn't allow certain people to testify in this trial for the defense or let certain evidence come in, especially regarding the lifelong abuse that the brothers had to endure. So I just wanted to remind you that this is here. I updated it for week 3 so you guys can see who is coming up next. And then I also updated the transcripts here. So you have a link to the October 1995 folder, which has all of the transcripts that we've been going through now. We are again on 17 and 18 today. So just letting you know. Also, what I was talking about, there's a folder here for the appellate resentencing docs as well, which you should have a link for, and it should take you to this page, and you should have all of the latest briefs, the amicus curiae that came in from the APA and the CPA, the California and American Psychology Associations that were in support of the brothers' release. So all of these kinds of things, there's exhibits and whatnot. So it's if you ever want to go and look at it yourself, figured let's keep a repository of everything so that anyone can access it at any time. All right, let's begin. Please hit that like button and let's get started. We are again starting with direct examination of Sergeant Thomas Edmonds. So, all right, Is this him? Yes. Okay. Thought I was in the right spot. I was missing where it said him. Okay, so direct examination. Mr. Khan is doing the questioning for the state. He says, "Sir, can you tell us?" The court says, "Let's hear what your first, middle, and last names are." The witness says, "Thomas Warren Edmonds," and he spells his last name. The court says, "Thank you." Mr. Khan says, "Sir, can you tell us what your current occupation is?" He says, "I am a police detective, sergeant employed by the city of Beverly Hills." "And how long have you been a police officer?" "I'm working my 34th year." "And how long have you been employed by the city of Beverly Hills?" "Always, since 1962." Always. "And how long have you been held your current rank of detective sergeant?" "I was promoted to sergeant in 1972, and this time I've been back in detectives since 1986. "And can you tell us your specific assignment is can you tell us what your specific assignment is as a detective sergeant?" "Yes, sir." "Can you tell us what your specific duties are?" "I supervise the crimes against persons detail, which is robbery, homicide, auto theft, and bunco forgery," whatever that is. You guys curious? I want to look it up. Let me take a look here. Okay, so it's spelled wrong in the transcript. It's bunco is actually spelled Bunco. It's a type of swindle or con game that involves using deception to gain money or property from others. So, like swindling people out of money, like in gambling or something. Bunco schemes can include banking schemes, charity schemes, and merchandise return scams. So, there you go. Tricks or ploys are used to gain the trust of their victims. Bunco operators promise money or goods in exchange for help or cash in advance. Ooh, that's kind of like like those people that rip off the elderly with their like retirement funds and stuff. That's what that reminds me of. So, anyways, that is a bunco forgery, and bunco is with a C. So, just FYI, we like to learn here. Next question. "And did you previously testify concerning this case before the grand jury?" Ms. Abramson says, "I'm going to object, Your Honor, as irrelevant at this point." The court says, "Well, the fact of his testimony is not relevant. You can answer that." The witness said, "Yes, I did." Mr. Khan continues, "And did you previously testify in regards to this case in Superior Court?" Ms. Abramson says, "Same objection, Your Honor, overruled." "Yes, sir," says the witness. Mr. Khan says, "Now I'd like to direct your attention to August the 21st of 1989 in the early morning hours. At that time, were you called from home?" "Yes, I was." "And were you given an assignment at that time?" "I was asked to respond to the city relative to a shooting that had taken place." "And where did you go at that time after receiving that call?" "To the police department." Now, at that time in 1989, did the Beverly Hills Police Department have its current building out of which it is assigned today? "No, sir, we were in temporary trailers." "And did you go directly to the temporary trailers or did you stop somewhere at a crime scene?" "No, I went directly to the trailers." "And after you got to the trailers, what did you do at that time?" "Subsequently, I was introduced by other officers to the two defendants." "Are you referring to Erik and Lyle Menendez, sitting here in court?" "Yes, sir." "And did you conduct some interviews at the time?" "Yes, I did." "Who did you interview that morning?" "First, I interviewed Erik and then Lyle." "Did you interview persons other than Erik and Lyle?" "Yes, I did." "Who else did you interview that morning?" "Harry Berman." Ms. Abramson says, "I couldn't hear the last two words of the question." The court says, "Did you interview other people that morning?" Ms. Abramson says, "That morning? Thank you, Your Honor." Mr. Khan says, who else did you interview? Perry Berman and a young lady, I believe Jennifer Crom. And I also spoke with Jennifer Crom's mother, I believe. So that I believe is Avril Crom, who is Avril Crom and Randolph. Am I saying it? Am I? No. No, I'm confusing. Clara Wright and Avril, or I'm sorry, we heard from Avril Crom already. I'm getting them confused. Up after Sergeant uh, Edmonds, we have then whatchamacallit, the Wrights. I was confusing them with the Crom. Sorry. All right. So now, at that time that you interviewed the defendants in this case, were they suspects or under arrest at that time? No, sir. Did you interview the defendants separately or together? Separately. Were the conversations with both defendants tape recorded? Yes, they were. And was the tape recording equipment in plain view so that the defendants could see that they were being recorded? Yes, sir. Other than yourself, were there any other persons who were present at the time of the recordings? No, sir. And what was the purpose then of interviewing the defendants at that time if they were not suspects in this case? I was attempting to rebuild both the parents' day and their day to see if I could find out also a little family history to determine why the parents were why their lives were taken and by whom ultimately. Now, when you interviewed Eric Menendez, can you tell us how he appeared at that time? Yes, he was upset and periodically would cry and was sad, acted sad. Did you have an opportunity to see the clothing that he was wearing? Yes, I did. Do you recall anything about the clothing that he was wearing at that time? I think that he was wearing a black jacket of some sort, but I'm not sure. It could have been Lyle that was wearing a black jacket. It's been some time ago, and I don't specifically remember. One of them was wearing a black jacket. I take it you saw no blood on either of the defendants? No, sir. Your Honor, I hold in my hands a tape recording. This recording has previously been marked as People's 40 for identification. May it be marked here as People's 90? The court says yes. Mr. Khan says, I also have in my hand a transcript. This is a 7-page transcript. It has previously been marked as People 41 for identification. May this be marked as 91 at this time. The court says 91. Mr. Khan says, Sir, have you previously listened to the tape recording that you made of the interview with Eric Menendez in the early morning hours of August the 21st of 1989? Yes, I have. And have you listened to that being played in court? Yes, sir. And have you testified in regard to the accuracy of that recording in the past? Yes, sir. This time, I would like to show you a transcript that I've just marked as 91. When did he do that? I'd like you to take a look at this transcript and ask if you recognize the transcript that I am showing you. Do you recognize the transcript that you see in front of you at this time? Yes, I'm on page 3, and it looks to me the same that I've read previously. I'll be playing a tape for you in a moment, and I'll ask you to review that transcript once again as I play that tape recording. Before I play that, though, let me once again direct your attention to the second page that is not a number page, but the second page of the transcript I just gave you, which signifies a legend identifying the speakers. Can you tell us who the speakers are on this particular recording? Yes, the legend indicating P is myself, Sergeant Edmonds, E is Eric, and U is an unidentified voice. Unintelligible, which I would assume would be either Eric or myself. Now, do you recall what time of the morning it was that that recording was made? It was made at 1:20 a.m. Is it customary as part of your procedure in conducting such an interview that you identify both the date and the time of the recording at the start of the recording? Yes. Did you do so in this case? Yes. All right. At this time, I would ask that the copies of this recording, copies of the transcript, be distributed to the jury. The court says, did your issue relate to this or something else? Ms. Abramson says, no, Your Honor. No, this is the same exhibit. The court says, all right then. Ms. Nahara says, we've provided a copy to the defense, and the court says the transcript may be distributed. Mr. Khan says, once again, I will stipulate that the court reporter need not transcribe the recording as it's being played. Ms. Aronson says, so stipulated, Your Honor. We will play the recording at this time. The court says, hold on a second. The witness seems to think it's not quite at the right speed. The witness says, isn't that running at the wrong speed? It sounds a bit slow. The court says, we'll ask you if you have an adjustment to speed it up a little bit. Mr. Khan says, I'll start from the beginning. Ms. Abramson says, perhaps the witness should adjust it since he knows if he's a chipmunk. Okay, so they had some issues playing back this particular tape for the jury here. The court says, okay, the tape was played. Mr. Khan says, in that recording that you just listened to, is that an accurate recording of the interview that you conducted with Erik Menendez in early morning hours of August the 21st, 1989? Yes, sir. The transcript currently before you that has been marked as 91 for identification, is that an accurate transcript of that recording? Yes, it is. Can you tell us why you terminated the conversation with Erik Menendez at that point? I felt that it was the humane thing to do because he was crying and appeared to be very sad. And you believed that he was not responsible for the homicides of his parents, is that correct? Yes, sir. Now, when you finished your interview with him, did he get up and leave the trailer where you were housed at that time? Pardon me? Did he get up and leave the room after you conducted your interview with him? I escorted him out to sort of the lobby area where his brother was with Mark Heffernan. Mark Heffernan is a tennis coach and that was I'm not sure who he coached, but I know he coached one of the brothers, and he was fond of the brothers, I believe. And when you were escorting him out, did you hear him speak to his brother? Yes. And what, if anything, did you hear him say to his brother Lyle Menendez at that time? Told him it was okay to talk to me, that I was okay, something to that effect. And after he conveyed that message to his brother, did you then interview Lyle Menendez? Yes. Now, you described the demeanor. Okay, before we move on to a next topic, this is kind of significant because if you remember, Erik had testified that he didn't know if he was going to be able to get through his questioning with the officer, and if he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to get through it without breaking down and telling the truth of what he actually did. So, and that was a worry between him and his brother that they had discussed. So, when Erik finally came out, they decided Erik was going to go first to do the questioning, or to go into the questioning first, and if he was able to keep it together and not break, then Lyle would take his lead. So that's where that comes in, that he said to him, it's okay, something to that effect. It's okay to talk to me. So I just wanted to clear that up before we went on. All right, so now you described the demeanor of Erik Menendez in the early morning of being sad and crying. Can you tell us what was the demeanor of the defendant Lyle Menendez that morning? I thought he was stoic. He was quiet and subdued, and periodically he would, I guess for lack of a better word, get melancholy type acting. What do you mean by melancholy type acting? He would get sad and then it would leave him, and then he'd go back to being very controlled. He was probably still in shock. Most of the time, he was fairly controlled during the interview. Did you see him cry at all that morning? A little, yes. Now, let me show you a recording. This recording has previously been marked as 42 for identification. I'll ask that this recording now be marked as 92 for identification, and I would also like to mark a transcript which was previously been marked as 43, and I would like to mark it as 93. Have you also previously testified in regard to the interview that you conducted with Lyle Menendez that morning? Yes, sir. And have you had an opportunity to review a transcript of that interview? Yes, I have. I'd like to show you now the transcript that I have marked as 93. You just take a quick look at that. The witness complies. Does that transcript appear to be familiar to you at this time? Yes, it does. And does that appear to be a transcript of the interview that you conducted with the defendant, Lyle Menendez, in the early morning hours of August the 21st of 1989? Yes, sir. As with the interview of the defendant, Erik Menendez, did you begin that interview by indicating on the tape recording the date and time of the interview? Yes, I did. And can you tell us what time you began the interview with Lyle Menendez? I believe it was 1:42 in the morning or 1:45 in the morning. And once again, directing your attention to the second page of that transcript, you see a legend there which signifies the speakers in the recording. Yes, myself, Sergeant Edmonds, and the L is Lyle, and the U is an unidentified voice, which either has to be me or somebody outside the door. During the playing of the tape, I heard some sounds that were from unknown third parties outside the door, possibly police radio sounds. Mr. Khan says, "All right. At this time, Your Honor, we are prepared to play the tape, or perhaps it would be an appropriate time for a recess now. The court says we'll do that tomorrow morning. We'll be in recess until tomorrow at 8:30. Don't discuss the case with anyone, and don't form any final opinions about it. Don't allow yourselves to be exposed to anything outside the courtroom, and we'll see you back here tomorrow at 8:30. The jury exits the courtroom, and the following is held outside the presence of the jury. The court says, counsel indicated there was some 402 hearing that you wanted to litigate. Ms. Abramson says, well, it's an inquiry, actually. We were given some notes recently from that were identified to us as coming from Sergeant Edmonds, and I briefly talked to the sergeant today about it, and those notes go into great length about the definitions of various words and phrases such as traumatized and shock. But that's not as significant, except perhaps the reason why these notes were suddenly generated. There have been issues. We're on the second trial, by the way, so these things should have been long turned over. And we're still having discovery issues coming from I almost said the Commonwealth, from the people of California. They are not turning things over. They're not telling them they're witnesses until like the last minute so that the court or the defense team can't prepare properly. So this is an issue that's been happening. We're on week 2, and this is, we've had multiple times where the court has had to have conversations outside the presence of the jury with the attorneys about this specific thing. So interesting, huh? Of more significance are the lengthy notes about kneecapping. So that's an interesting thought, too. And this comes up, if you recall, Nathan Hochman made a big deal about the kneecapping thing that didn't actually happen at during the crime. Jose's knees happened to have injuries to them, but he wasn't kneecapped like a mafia hit, which is what they want you to think the brothers tried to do. Of more significance are the lengthy notes about kneecapping and what it means, and I was just wanting to inquire whether the people were, since they did turn these notes over to us, were they going to try to elicit any information from Sergeant Edmonds about kneecapping? Mr. Khan says no. Court says, all right. Ms. Abramson says, and further, whether they were seeking to have Sergeant Edmonds change his previous characterization of both Erik and Lyle Menendez as appearing traumatized. Mr. Khan says, we're not seeking to change anything. We're going to I already asked the witness as to the demeanor of the defendants at the time of the interview. He's already testified to what that is. Counsel can follow up on it on cross-examination. I did ask him what he meant by the word traumatized, and he reviewed the definitions and he agreed, as he indicated in the notes, that that was not the most appropriate word to be used in describing how they appeared that evening. The court says, all right, let me inquire. On page 3 of the Erik Menendez transcript, line 3, maybe I misheard it, or having listened to the tape for the first time in 2 years, is that an accurate transcript of that? Miss Abramson says, no, I thought what I heard was, well, I heard line 4, the words, that's his business, not in his business. The court says, I thought I heard, but my dad doesn't have a lot of friends in his business. You've listened to the tape much more than I have. Miss Abramson says, I heard it that way in the beginning as well. I remember there was a dispute over whether it said my dad does have a lot of friends or doesn't have a lot of friends. At some point in the last trial, we disputed. The court interrupts and says, I'm just bringing it to your attention. I don't recall the dispute. In hearing it, it sounded that way. Perhaps those who have the tape, a copy of it, can listen to it, and if there's a disagreement or if this is the way it should be, that's fine. Ms. Abramson says, I don't know. I think ultimately we've got it refined down to as good as it can be. I thought I heard him say that's his business, but it's for the jury to decide. The court says, all right, okay, we'll be in recess until 8:30. Ms. Abramson says, no, Your Honor. The court says, the rights are up next. Is that right? Ms. Nahara says, I'm not sure. I don't believe so now. The court says, we'll stay here and wait. Ms. Nahara says, let me have a second. Thanks. The jury exits the jury room, so they leave for the day. The court says, who's the next witness that the people are going to call? Mr. Khan says, we are going to call Carlos Baralt tomorrow. See, they. So tomorrow we have Sergeant Edmonds. He finishes up his testimony, and then Clara Wright. They keep doing this to the defense, saying we're going to call so and so, and then they don't call so and so. They call so and so else. There's some other person, some other so and so they call. So here again, they're lying about who they're calling. And like you got to have a strategy going forward. You can't just be going willy-nilly when you've got trial going and you have to prepare the other side. You have to give them time to prepare. So this is ridiculous. But anyways, okay. So he says, we are going to call Carlos Baralt tomorrow. We did want to litigate the issue of Jamie Pisarcik or have the court determine whether or not. The court says, hold on a minute, let the jurors out. Brief pause. Mr. Khan says, I wanted to address the issue of Jamie Pisarcik so we can put her on as soon as possible. Ms. Abramson says, well, first of all, Your Honor, we've been preparing in accordance with the people's list and intentions, and Carlos Baralt, in our view, is an impeaching witness on Randy Wright. Therefore, whether the people put Carlos Baralt on first or Randy Wright on first, Carlos Baralt doesn't leave town until after Randy Wright testifies. And the excuse that Ms. Nahara has given us for needing to put Mr. Baralt on first is that Mr. Baralt is of the expectation that he's leaving tomorrow night. So they are trying to basically, they need to have this Randolph Wright go on first, and then they can have Carlos Baralt come on because he says something that impeaches Randolph Wright. So you can't have him do it first and then have Randy Wright on. So, continuing on, she says, now, I don't know of any emergency that will require him to leave, but just with respect to the order of witnesses, since he was present for some events that Mr. Wright testifies about, it seems to me that the proper order is Mr. Wright. Secondly, we just discussed this Jamie Pisarcik business. Was it yesterday? Ms. Towery says, this morning. Jeez, talk about a long day. Ms. Abramson says this morning, and we're not going to be prepared to have a hearing on that issue tomorrow since we have been busy today, and the court indicated that we would set a date to do that, and the date is at least going to have to include the passage of a weekend so we can write something. Ms. Towery says, that was going to be my request, Your Honor, because I did want to ask the court for an opportunity to submit a brief with respect to at least a 352 issue now that it's been raised by the prosecution. I'd like this weekend to be able to work on that and prepare it, and I'd ask that if Ms. Pisarcik is leaving on Thursday, as I understand the prosecution to indicate, I'd ask that it be set sometime next week, and then she can, as the court indicated, return, hopefully. Hopefully, she'll be back before it's time for her testimony to happen, but if not, she certainly can return from Pittsburgh, I think, in order to testify. The court says, well, as far as the scheduling of her testimony, any particular issues that I should know about? Mr. Khan says, no, I think at this point it's unrealistic. She'll be able to testify tomorrow. She's leaving tomorrow. We just need a date that we can order her back. So the state is saying we're not going to get to her tomorrow. The court says, I want to give the defense a chance to respond to the issues that are raised in the new interview of her. So you want her here for the hearing? Is that going to be necessary, or is it just going to be litigated on the offer? Ms. Towery says, I think it would be helpful if she were here for the hearing, but I can't really tell you, Your Honor, because frankly, I haven't had a chance to fully digest the new information that we were provided by the prosecution, and I haven't begun working on my brief, so I can't really tell you that. I certainly don't think it would hurt if she were available. Ms. Nahara says, once again, Your Honor, it's our position that there is no new information. We provided them with notes that were taken during the time of our most recent interview with her, where she simply went over the same incident, even if she may have phrased it differently. There's nothing substantially new, and counsel still hasn't indicated what that new information consisted of. The court says, we talked about this morning, the implications of Ms. Lansing and Mr. Moans, specifically related to the witness testimony, unless that was brought out during the earlier interviews of this witness testimony before. Ms. Nahara says the only implication as to Ms. Lansing, and this might have even come out at the first trial, was that the witness testified that when she got all the information, she gave it to Ms. Lansing to give to Menendez, which makes sense because it's the only way stuff could get to him. And she testified in the first trial she gave to him or she got it to him. That's the only implications as to Ms. Lansing. The court says, I have no recollection of that one way or the other. Ms. Nahara says, if that is new, that's the whole of the monumental new amount of information they need to digest. Second, as to Mr. Moans, there was simply a statement that I gave them typed up that they got last the day after we had that motion about the fact that that he was considering Paul Moans as a witness and he had read something that she thought maybe in a book by him. That's the full implication of him. Ms. Towery says again, those are the two issues that we raised that relate to the attorneys. There are other matters that are raised in the notes. So something about, did Ms. Lansing not turn over some discovery or something? I can't remember the specifics. I think it had to do with Lyle maybe trying to get trying to elicit some testimony from somebody. I think that's potentially what the implications are about Ms. Lansing, who was Lyle's attorney in the first trial. I'm not sure who Mr. Moans is, maybe an appellate attorney or another attorney that came on after the trial, perhaps the first trial, because I don't recognize that name. But anyways, the court says, let's not dispute it as to, Ms. Towery says, let me ask this, Your Honor. The court says, because I'm giving you time and you'll have time. The issue is whether or not you want her here for the hearing, and that might affect when we schedule the hearing. That's all. Ms. Towery says, I think it would help if Detective and I hate to have him do more work again. I mentioned to the court yesterday, and it wasn't all ingested. It's very difficult to read his notes and understand what he means because sometimes sentences trail off. Ms. Abramson says, how about answering the judge? Yes, next Friday, Your Honor. Ms. Towery says, what I was going to say. Ms. Abramson says, that's what I want. Ms. Towery says, if we could get a report, I could make a better evaluation as to whether or not I feel she needs to be present. Ms. Abramson says, I think she needs to be present. Ms. Towery says, okay, next Friday. Ms. Abramson says, good time will be next Friday. We'll have a lot of testimony under our belts. The court says, I'm not inclined just to take a deposition of her. If there is something for specific refinement of her testimony, then we might do that. Ms. Abramson says, exactly, yes. The court says, I'm not inclined just to do it. Ms. Abramson says, rather than have Detective Zoller write a report and there might be a dispute between the witness and Detective Zoller, it's what she said, not what he wrote. Mr. Khan says, I would ask we schedule it before Friday. I think that's putting it off far too long. Or before Friday, he says. The court says, would she be available before Friday? The whole purpose of doing it. Ms. Abramson says, I'll give her time to go to Pittsburgh. The court says, one person talking at a time. At this point, it just happened to be me. At this point, I want the hearing done and then have her testify rather than do the hearing and wait 2 weeks before she testifies. So, when would she be available to come back and testify? Mr. Khan says, well, it's my understanding that she's going to be out of town as of tomorrow, so any date that the court wants her back, she'll be back. Ms. Nahara says, we'll be back by the 30th. Whatever date the court picks, we have to bring her back. The people are going to have to bring her back. Court says, is there some reason to have her come back before her scheduled return? Ms. Nahara says, because we think this is going to go a lot faster than we had originally anticipated. Court says, do you think you'll be finished by the 30th and all of the next week you'll be through with the whole case? Mr. Khan says, not the whole case. I'm looking at the testimony of Roger McCarthy and I want to schedule his testimony so that he is not going to be inconvenienced. And I'm thinking of putting him on the 30th and working the other witnesses around him. I would like to try to finish up with Ms. Pisarcik sometime before the 30th. The court says, well, I'll tell you this. There's a juror who needs to leave around 3:30 on the 27th. That's Friday. That doesn't really change things very much. Let's schedule it for Wednesday, the 25th, if that's going to give you sufficient time to get your paperwork, and if the people want to respond, and if there's a need to readjust, that we'll do that, and that will be next Wednesday, the 25th. Ms. Nahara says, okay. Mr. Khan says, all right. The court says, that brings us back to who's on tap for tomorrow. Mr. Khan says, we still have another tape to play with Edmonds. We have Carlos Baralt and we have the rights. The court says, okay. Mr. Khan says, and Mr. Whitkin as well. The court says, okay. Ms. Abramson says, I don't know if the defense had intended to call Baralt in their case in chief or their rebuttal or whatever it is, but rather than the man come back twice, it would certainly be fruitful to have him testify to whatever it is he's got to say right now so that if they're calling him in rebuttal on something that Wright's going to testify about, then it might make more sense to have him testify after they do. That's fine. The court says, so then we'll finish up with Sergeant Edmonds, then go to either the Wrights or Whitkin, and then the Wrights and then Baralt. Is that right? Correct. Okay. Ms. Abramson says, "Thank you, Your Honor. Court is in recess until tomorrow at 8:30. All right, we are now moving on to October 18th, 1995, and we are in the Van Nuys, California courthouse with Stanley Weisberg. Following proceedings were held in open court out of the presence of the jury. The court says, in the trial, defendants are in court with their lawyers. Something you wanted to talk about? Mr. Khan says, yes. Just an update on the scheduling of our witnesses. I learned this morning that in regard to Jamie Pisarcik, she apparently has invested $10,000 in a horse show that is going to be conducted next week, Wednesday through Friday of next week, and I'm very much concerned that she may make herself uncooperative as a result of that investment. I'm also concerned about putting her over until the 30th because I'm concerned about running out of witnesses next week, whether we can fill up the entire week. Once again, I would ask that we try to resolve her matter and take her testimony either Monday or Tuesday of next week. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, there are many other witnesses besides Ms. Pisarcik who can fill up next week, not the least of which is the coroner. Sooner or later, I suppose they have to put him on. He's local, and I don't think he has $10,000 to invest in a horse show. Ms. Towery says, I didn't understand what Mr. Khan said. She's invested $10,000 in what? Ms. Abramson says, a horse show. If that's next week, why does this Monday or Tuesday make it less threatening for her investment? The court says, what can we do, or what we can do is schedule her hearing for Monday. Whether her testimony will be completed by the end of the day Tuesday, I can't say. Mr. Khan says, right. Ms. Abramson says, I guess we're not going to have time to file my pleadings in advance. Well, we'll just have to file them on Monday. The court says, whenever you can get it done. Ms. Towery says, I can't get it done until the weekend, Your Honor. The court says Monday will be when we'll get it. Mr. Khan says, thank you. The court says, anything else at this point? Mr. Khan says, no. Okay. The court was informed. I haven't received all the information yet. The bailiff says our jurors are out in the back. Go ahead and bring them in. Court says, we'll take a short break. I want to talk to the bailiff for a moment. Ms. Abramson says, Judge, also there's a matter, and then a recess was taken. So he cut her off. Following proceedings were held, or maybe it just didn't get recorded. The following proceedings were held in open court outside the presence of the jury. The court says, okay, the court is in session and we have everybody here. Just one matter that occurred this morning. The jurors are being transported to their lounge, and the court is informed that there were 2 TV cameras in close proximity to where the jurors were being transported, as well as a television news reporter, with a microphone. It's unclear whether the jurors were photographed. One cameraman stated that the camera was not on. There's indication that the news reporter had his microphone pointed in the direction of where the bailiffs were escorting the jurors into the lounge and inquired as to whether this was the Menendez jury. The reporter is identified as Warren Wilson. Are you here, Mr. Wilson? I am, Your Honor. Do you wish to be heard? Yes. Stay right there, sir. Mr. Wilson says, from what I've heard from you, I'm reminded of Furman. You're reminded of who? Mark Furman. Are you now? Yes, I am. There was no pointing of my microphone. Mark Furman was the lead. This is a weird comment that he made because Mark Furman, I believe, he's referring to the lead investigator of the OJ case who had a lot of issues with potentially planting evidence. Yeah, he became a very non-credible witness, and unfortunately, yeah. So he's kind of like the Michael Proctor of back then. He was, but not quite. He's not quite as bad as Michael Proctor. I think he may have like there might have been some like chain of custody issues with his stuff. I don't remember the specifics, and I don't think he's a crooked cop. Michael Proctor is. All right, moving forward, Michael Proctor is in the Karen Reed case. In case you're wondering, the court says, "Are you now reminded of Mark Furman?" He says, "Yes, I am. There was no pointing of my microphone. It was not on. The camera was not on. Nobody shot anything. No jurors were present because the people who were getting off the bus had already gone into the building, and the deputies did not inform us that we could no longer be on that street because, as of yesterday, the street had been open to the public, and up until that time it had been closed to everybody. We were not aware that the restrictions that were in place last week had been lifted. Nobody told us that. So we parked our vehicles there, as everyone else did, and we were in the vicinity of our vehicles. The reason why we were there is because a police officer said if you go down there now, you'll see Erik and Lyle Menendez leaving a van. We were not interested in a jury. We understood the court order about no pictures of the jurors. These officers are not telling you the truth, and that's what I meant by the first statement about Furman. They're not telling the truth. Damn. This guy coming in hot. He's like, Mark Furman, oh yeah, you guys screwed that case up because your lead investigators were lying and not telling the full truth. And here we are with your court officers telling you lies about what actually went down, trying to, I don't know, get the members of the press in trouble with the court. He says, I've gone down and talked with my cameraman and the other cameraman, and they have a different view than what has been presented to you about our being down there. The court says you're saying that your cameraman told you, and you're saying to me that the camera was not on. Mr. Wilson says the camera was not on, Your Honor. It was not pointed at anybody. They were carrying it down to the level, demonstrating, and he demonstrated with his hands. And you can shoot at that level. So he was bringing it down to a certain level, holding the camera. The court says, and are you saying, I don't know why that was so hard. And are you saying that the other camera was in the same position? Both cameramen were together. The court says, are you also saying that your microphone and recording device was not on? Mr. Wilson said, was not on and wasn't pointing at the deputies. The court says, okay. Did you inquire whether this was the Menendez jury? Did you ask that question? Mr. Wilson says, there was no jury. I saw no jury. The jury had already gone into the building. The court says, the question is, did you ask, is this the Menendez jury? Mr. Wilson said, no, I wasn't interested in the juror, so I didn't ask about the jurors. The court says, okay, regardless of your view versus what the deputies would say occurred, do you now understand what area is restricted and where you should not be? Mr. Wilson says, I did not until, do you know now? This moment? Do you now understand? I understand that we are not allowed to shoot on that street. The court says, and you're representing to me that no juror was photographed by you or any other news agency, is that correct? I can represent to you that no pictures of the jurors were taken this morning by the two cameramen who were down there with me. The court says, were there any other cameramen there? No, sir. And when you say this morning, has it occurred on some other occasion you're aware of? No, we have had no reason to go there. We have not shot anything. The court says, do you now understand that is an area where you and your cameraman are not to be? I do now. I was not aware before because I didn't get a copy of what Jerry Ann Hazlett was supposed to have passed out to the media. So somebody coordinating in the courthouse with the media, the press, the people outside. I'm sure this got a lot of people standing outside the courthouse or either side. This was very, very sensational at the time. or TV. I asked her, and Mary Stevenson said that she didn't get a copy either. The court says, my question is, do you now understand? Yes, Your Honor. The court says, would you take the responsibility of letting all your colleagues know that's an area where they shouldn't be? Mr. Wilson said, on the days that I'm here, I will do that. The court says, you've been here every day. Mr. Wilson says, I may not be here every day hereafter. The court says, would you take the responsibility of notifying everybody in the media? Mr. Wilson says, I can notify those who are present when I'm here. I don't want to take the responsibility for anyone who may come when I'm not here. He has an excellent point. Like, why is it his responsibility? I think that should be somebody else's responsibility. The court says, okay, I'm not going to adjudicate the merits of it. I hear what you're saying, and I hear the accusations you're making that the sheriffs were saying something that's not true. I could easily adjudicate that and have testimony taken under oath and have people say exactly what happened, and I don't know if it's worthwhile at this point to do that. But I certainly would be inclined to do that if I felt that there was a misrepresentation being made to me in open court. But my concern really, how about a misrepresentation to you by your own officers? How about that? Jerk. I hate this guy. Oh, he's annoying. All right. But my concern really is the integrity of the trial and the fairness of those proceedings to all the participants, and that includes fairness to the jurors and whether or not any representatives of the media would interfere with that right, their right of privacy, and their role as jurors in this case. Mr. Wilson says, we'd be willing to show you. Let me see the tape that's in this camera. The court says, I'm not concerned about that. My concern is whether or not anything has been recorded to of the jurors. You're saying it was not? How many times do you have to tell you? Mr. Wilson says, I'm saying it is not, and I'm willing to show you the tape to show you that there is nothing recorded of the jury from this morning or any other time. The court says, okay, I'm not at that point going to conduct a full hearing on the matter. As I said, I'm concerned really with the end result, not that the controversy, but the not with the controversy, but the impact of the trial itself. So at this point, I'm not going to do anything further, but if there is a representation of this, whether by you or someone else, the court will conduct a formal hearing and deal with it with appropriate sanctions. Ms. Abramson says, could I inquire? We don't know anything. I mean, I don't, and I don't think any of my clients know anything about where the jury comes from. Mr. Wilson says, I didn't know either. The court says, I'll fill you in on all the details. Ms. Abramson says, I have no interest in knowing the details. I wasn't aware there was an area off limits. The court says, we'll give you all the information that will assist counsel. Ms. Abramson says, I just want to make sure our clients are not photographed either leaving or entering vans with their shackles and chains, which is how they're transported and in their jail garb. I would ask the court to consider including in any prohibition of photographing our clients in that condition as well. The court says, well, my concern right now is dealing with the issue involving the jurors and whether there's been any breach of the rules that relate to the role of the jurors in this case. All right, anything else at this point? Okay. We'll resume now with the jury. Ms. Abramson says, there is a matter that I would like to address to the court. It doesn't have to be done now, but at some point, in camera with opposing counsel, but not with the public. It has to do with a juror. It's a minor matter, but the court says, all right, we'll have the jury come out and we'll proceed with the testimony. Jury enters the courtroom. The court says, okay, the jury is back. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As I will do periodically during the course of the proceedings, I'll ask again whether any of you have been exposed to anything about this case outside of the courtroom in any form whatsoever since I last asked that question. If you have, would you raise your hand? Okay, nobody has. All right, we'll resume with the trial. The people's witness was on the stand. Thomas Edmonds. So he's returning now. Witness at the time of adjournment resumed the stand, blah, blah, blah. He spells his name again. Okay, the court says, And I believe you were just about at the point of playing a tape recording, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan says, I believe at this time the new transcripts have been handed out to the jurors. The interview of Lyle Menendez on August the 21st of 1989, and at this time we will proceed with the playing of the tape. The court says, for the record, this is tape number 92, exhibit 93 is the transcript. Again, as with all transcripts of tape recordings, they are just to assist you in following along or listening to the tape. The evidence of the conversation is the tape recording itself, not the transcript. As you're aware, these transcripts are not always accurate. There are sometimes things omitted. Some things are just erroneously placed in the transcripts by mistake. All right, you may proceed. Exhibit 92 is played. The court says, okay, the tape has been played. Now we continue direct examination by Mr. Khan. Is that tape recording that we just listened to an accurate recording of the conversation that you had with Lyle Menendez in the early morning hours of August the 21st, 1989? Yes, it is. Now, following the interviews that you conducted on that particular day, did you continue to do additional work on this case? Yes. And as part of your work on this case, did you pursue the possibility of an organized crime connection? Ms. Abramson says, I would object, Your Honor. What's your legal grounds? Well, first of all, no notice, and second of all, no relevance. Overruled. Yes, I did, says the witness. Mr. Khan says, can you tell us what you did in that regard? In September of 1989, myself and Detective Doug Plog, that's a name, Doug Plog, went to New York and New Jersey and interviewed FBI agents and officers from the New York Police Department and the New Jersey and New York State Police that are familiar with organized crime and criminals. And the purpose was to find out if the method of operation in this homicide fit into something organized crime might be involved in. Court says, okay, your next question, please. Mr. Khan says, yes. Can you tell us why you pursued the organized crime connection? Mr. Levin says, objection, irrelevant. The court says, let me see counsel at the side here so we can discuss this issue a little further. Mr. Levin says, is that the hall bar or the side bar? The court says, an appropriate location. Okay. The court says, okay, the first answer of the witness was the same. Mr. Gessler says, we're still missing the direct attorney. So this is the conversation outside the presence of the jury. Mr. Gessler says, we're still missing the district attorney, sorry. Ms. Abramson says, he's here, he's so silent, you never noticed. Mr. Gessler says, sorry. The court says, the first answer of the witness was the same as Detective Zoller has already provided in his testimony. The only concern I had in the inquiry yesterday by the defense as to whether you were going to go into the so-called kneecapping of the witnesses. Is that the tenor of this question and the response that you expect to elicit? Mr. Khan says, no, my only other question, I'm simply going to ask him why he pursued it. I asked him that yesterday. He told me yesterday he pursued it because of the statements that Lyle, the court interrupts and says, that's what you expect his answer to be. Nothing to do with kneecapping? Right. Okay, then we'll proceed. Jury comes back. They never left. I think that was just a sidebar, as you would say in Massachusetts. The court says, okay, everybody is back. All right, go ahead. Mr. Khan says, can you tell us why you pursued that organized crime responsibility? Yes. During the conversation with Lyle, he had mentioned that Mr. Menendez had dealings with buying up businesses. Later in the investigation, we found out that some of the businesses that he had been buying up were pornographic type businesses, and there's a link between pornographic business and organized crime. Well, that's interesting. The cops went there on their own, or so it seems. because of Jose's interests, his businesses. So live entertainment, were they doing the thing that rhymes with corn also? Or were there, because he, I think, may have owned multiple businesses at once. So, um, and he had a lot of connections and things. So was he dealing with the corn business? And then that is what made them go into that. Interesting. I did not know that. I didn't know. I didn't actually know where the crime, organized crime, came from. I thought maybe the brothers had suggested it because that seems to be what the prosecutors have always tried to want us to believe. But here we have it. That is not so. All right, going on. Moving on. So, we wanted to explore the fact and see if maybe organized crime would be unhappy with the business dealings of Mr. Menendez. And during that investigation, did you come across a man by the name of Noel Bloom? I heard that name. Yes, Detective Zoller worked on that aspect of it. Mr. Khan says, thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor. The court says, all right. Cross examination begins by Mr. Gessler for that would be Erik Menendez. Sorry, I said the wrong name. That would be for Lyle Menendez. Thinking Lyle, wrong name came out. Mr. Gessler says, good morning, Sergeant. Good morning, sir. You mentioned that you've been at least in the police business for 32 years and working 34. 33 going on 34. I take it this is his answer. Sorry. No, question is, and 33 going on 34. I take it during that time you have conducted extensive interviews of people. Yes. In fact, that's a part of police business, isn't it? Yes, sir. And did you start out as a regular patrolman? Yes, I did. How many years did you how many years did you have experience in that? 5. I made detective in 1967. So you've been a detective for 28 years? No, I went back in patrol after I got promoted, and then I worked another crime suppression detail also. Would you speak up a little bit? Yes. Use the mic a little bit. I went back into patrol as a patrol sergeant for a while, and then I went into crime suppression, and then I came back into detectives. And a lot of detective work is interviewing people? Yes, sir. Interviewing witnesses? Yes, it is. Interviewing suspects? Yes, sir. And when you interview someone, I take it that you're looking at someone with more than just words that somebody says. Yes. You're looking at the demeanor of the person you're talking to? Yes, you are. Looking at body language? Yes. And when we say body language, what do you mean that you're observing there? Movements or non movements, and contact, and various things people do. To help you decide the state of mind, let's say, of the person that you're interviewing. Yes, sir. And to decide a little bit where to go on your next subject, perhaps of questioning, frequently. Now, on this night, on or early morning hours of August 21st, in your interview with Lyle Menendez, you felt that he was definitely affected by the death of his parents, didn't you? Yes. You felt that he was sorrowful, somber. Lyle? Yes, Lyle. I felt that he was being stoic and controlled. He did show some emotion towards sorrow. And did he also seem somber to you? Yes. And when you testified before the grand jury, you still felt, looking at that interview, that he was sorrowful and somber, didn't you? Objection calls for speculation. The court says speculation as to whether that's how he testified at the grand jury. Speculation as to the defendant's state of mind. Well, objection sustained as to the form of the question. Mr. Kessler says, "Did you testify before the grand jury in that matter, Sergeant?" "Yes, I did." "At that time, you knew that Joseph Lyle Menendez was a suspect in this matter, didn't you?" "Yes, I did." "And at that hearing, did you testify that it was your recollection that he was sorrowful and somber at that time?" Mr. Khan says objection. Mr. Gessler says of your interview with him. Objection, hearsay. Overruled, you can answer the question. I believe I did, yes. And at that time, you still felt he was definitely affected by the death of his parents? Yes. And you also so testified at the first trial in this matter, didn't you? Yes, sir. Now, the statement that you took, did you talk to Lyle Menendez for a couple of minutes or as, sorry, let me restart that. Now, the statement that you took, did you talk to Lyle Menendez for a couple of minutes as you were getting the tape set up? In other words, before the tape actually started? Yes, I did. And that's kind of to set the groundwork and tell him what you're doing. Yes. Tell him the purpose of this interview was so that you could try to solve the crime? Exactly. And is that what you were looking for? Anything he could give you that would help you in finding out what happened? Yes. And you made that as clear as you could to him, and then you turned the tape on? Yes, sir. That's a fair statement of the process, isn't it? Yes, sir. And as you were doing this process with him, he told you that at one point he had gone back to the house because Erik needed an ID? Yes, a bogus ID. A bogus ID because they might go to a bar or whatever. And even though Erik didn't drink because he was a tennis player, he'd need his ID to get in. Correct. And he told you at that time that it was a phony ID, right? Yes, he did. And then you mentioned to him that we have we have to get personal. If there's any problems, we've got to solve this, right? Yes. And at that point, did Lyle Menendez say, "Well, one of my concerns is I don't like any bad press about my father now"? Yes. And he'd also said that prior to going on tape, as soon as we went into the room. So Lyle Menendez was worried about bad things getting out about Jose's reputation. So he was protecting Jose throughout that interview. He seemed to be wanting to protect his father's reputation and image. I don't know if he was specific with his father. I think the family name? Yeah. And he seemed concerned about that, did he? Yes. And that's when you told him, "Gee, this is just between us so we can solve the crime. We're not newspaper reporters. We're not the Globe or anything like that." What kind of comment is that coming from law enforcement? Trying to make them all buddy buddy when their their confirmation bias gets them a lot when they're trying to put people away, in my opinion. Anyways, answer was, well, I didn't mention brand names, but I told him that I wasn't a reporter or a pipeline for the paper. All right. In other words, there wouldn't be any leaks or anything he said to any of the tabloids if he was confiding. Exactly. The court says you still have to speak up a little louder. The witness says, blah, blah, blah. The witness says, yes, sir. Mr. Gessler says, and you were still trying to get from him information to help you know where to go to solve the crime. That was oddly stated, but he says correct. That was the whole tenor of this interview, wasn't it? Yes. And then after you did that, he talked to you about, oh, gee, my parents seem to be enjoying their lives more now. My dad works a lot. He's stressed out. He works to help us out and provide for us, right? Yes. And then he said that he himself had worked for the company for a while in the last year. Yes. And he said that what they were doing was that little companies were being squeezed out and going down, and his dad was a pretty ruthless businessman that he believed in the bottom line. Yes, sir. And then for the first time, he said, "So, it might be business related." Isn't that his words? I believe so. And he also said that his parents were clean of any drug activity. It wouldn't involve anything like that. Correct. At no point, at no place in the conversation did Lyle Menendez mention the word mafia, did he? No. Well, there you have it. Mafia, mafia hit did not, that theory did not come from Lyle. He never mentioned that at all in his conversation with you that night, did he? No. And at any place in this conversation that you had with Lyle Menendez, did he mention the words organized crime? No. After he talked about that aspect of his dad, you asked him more and he said, "Well, he's buying a lot of little companies and the little companies are jealous they're getting squeezed out." Yes. Again, he didn't mention mafia. All right. So sorry about that. There was a car door that slammed somewhere and my dog goes crazy. So apologies. I'm sure that was loud to your ears. I will try to cut that out if I can. All right. So where are we? Sorry. He says again, he didn't mention mafia or organized crime. No, sir. And then he told you, let's see. I think you again said at page 9 of the transcript there, somebody has to be involved in this, and it's got to be somebody that's real serious. Those were your words, weren't they? I believe so. And Mr. Menendez, Lyle Menendez replied, I don't know. I'd have to think, right? Well, without looking, I would say that's probably correct. May I show the witness the transcript, Your Honor? The court says yes, with the understanding again that the transcript is only a reflection of the words of the tape and the transcript might not be 100% accurate. The witness says yes, that's correct. Mr. Gessler says, I don't know, I'd have to think. Those were his words in reply to that. Yes, sir. Again, he did not use the words organized crime or mafia or anything like that in reply to your question. No, he didn't. And then after that, he told you that when his father got to the company that he cleaned it up and he basically fired a whole lot of people. That's correct. And that again was in response to your questioning of anything that he could help you out with. Yes, sir. And he said he'd squeeze out a lot of weaker people, but that's the way, if you're weaker, you lose. But everything was legit, everything was honest. Yes. And he did not at any point in that conversation tell you that his dad was crooked. No. Or involved with gangs or the mafia or organized crime himself. No, he didn't. In fact, did he ever mention the pornography business? That I'm not 100% certain, but I don't believe so. The idea that this business might be involved and therefore organized crime might be involved, that came from your investigation later, didn't it? Yes, it did. So, based only on the fact that Lyle Menendez had told you his father was buying up and squeezing out these companies. Yes. And then you went to find out what kind of companies this might be, and that led you going to Jersey and New York as well. He says yes, and this conversation with you, Lyle Menendez never mentioned the words Noel Bloom, did he? No, I don't believe he did. No. That again is some name that you came in contact with in your follow-up investigation. No, it's a name that Detective Zoller and Tom Linehan came up with in their follow-up. Yeah, and I'm not sure their source, if it was Carol Coe or Lyle. And then he told you about his mother. He said that in the past, she's been on the verge of contemplating taking her own life. She was very edgy and had ideations of taking her own life, but recently she seemed very stable. Yes. And then he told you about the fact, though, that his mother had gone out and bought a rifle. That's correct. Then at the end of the interview, he suggested you said, "You can't go home." He said, "Can I go with Mark Heffernan?" That's correct. A coach that you knew was, I think your phraseology was a little off, but it's close. All right, the idea was he needed a place to stay, and yes, it was okay with you and okay with him that he go with Mark. Yes. Now, this interview ended then at about, I think you said 2:18 in the morning? Yes, sir. And did you see him? He went out and rejoined Eric Menendez, I take it? He went out and met up with Eric and Mark Heffernan. Mark Heffernan? Yes. The coach that he had mentioned? Correct. Thank you. I have nothing further. Examination now will begin on behalf of Eric Menendez. All right, Ms. Abramson is going to be doing the questioning, and she starts out saying, "Good morning, Sergeant Edmonds." He says, "Good morning." Sergeant Edmonds, was there another sergeant working at the Beverly Hills Police Department in August of 1989 who has a name similar to yours? Yes. I was thinking about that, and his name is Edmondson. I'm not sure that he was a sergeant in 89. However, was he an officer at the time? Yes. All right. And the reason this comes up is because you and I were talking before the court session today about whether you recall speaking to Perry Berman before you phoned him up at home and woke him up. Yes. I don't believe that I did, but you don't believe that you spoke to Perry Berman before you spoke to Erik and Lyle? No. You don't believe that you spoke to Perry Berman before you called Perry Berman's house and asked him to come down to the station to be interviewed. Is that right? That's correct. I don't know who Perry Berman was until it was told by Lyle. Till you were told by Lyle? Well, Lyle provided the last name. I think I only had a first name from Erik. But more importantly, you don't remember talking on the phone to any citizens before you spoke to Erik and Lyle that morning? No, I don't recall talking to anybody. So, when we were having this conversation, you thought perhaps because I told you Harry Berman testified that he spoke to you before you called him? Well, it's a long shot possibility that it occurred, but I don't happen to remember it. Okay. And that's why you thought perhaps the person you spoke to was Edmondson, who's another officer at Beverly Hills Police Department? Yes. We don't know. We haven't asked Edmondson, right? Correct. Now, Detectives Zoller and Linehan were the officers assigned to do, if you will, the on the ground investigation in this case, correct? Crime scene, yes. And beyond crime scene, later on, they were doing investigating, possible suspects? Yes. And you were their supervisor? Yes. But the day to day operation of the investigation was their responsibility, not yours? Well, I was ultimately responsible, but yes, they were doing the work. Yes. And they would report into you periodically on the progress of the investigation. Yes, ma'am. And you are you sorry, and were you satisfied with their work? Very satisfied. Did you have confidence that Detective Zoller and Detective Linehan could handle a crime scene? Yes. You heard on the tape recorded interview that was just played with Lyle Menendez, you're explaining to Lyle why it was that you didn't want people trooping around the crime scene? Correct. What's trooping? Tromping around, maybe? Um, he says correct. And you were confident that Detective Zoller and Linehan would take all the appropriate precautions to not contaminate or corrupt or mess up the crime scene. Yes, ma'am. Now, is it true, Sergeant Edmonds, that as an experienced police detective, you would use perhaps a different questioning technique if you were talking to someone who you considered at the time a suspect versus someone who you considered a victim or a witness? Yes, you would. And is it correct to characterize the questioning technique that you were using with Eric and Lyle Menendez that morning as the method you'd use to talk to victim witnesses? That's correct. When you first sat, well, when you first went into the strike that, when you tape recorded the discussion between yourself and Eric Menendez, were the two of you in a private room? Yes, ma'am. When you first went into the private room, did you bring him with you? When I first went in? Well, did you go in first and have him brought to you, or did you escort him to the room? I went into the room and plugged a little Panasonic recorder in and put it on the table and verified it was operational. Then I came back out and contacted him I had already met him, but yes. Was there any reason why? Yes. Yes, you escorted him back to the room? Yes. Okay. Was there any reason why he was interviewed first? No. And when you brought him in the room, I take it the two of you sat down. Correct. And did you have some preliminary conversation with him before the tape recorder was turned on? Yes, I did. And was that similar to what you've indicated to Mr. Gessler that you discussed with Lyle Menendez explaining your purpose? Yes. And I also asked him if he would, or if he wanted to go to the restroom or have a cup of coffee or soda pop. Soda pop. Not too many people call it both. Um, I don't mind it. It's fine. All right. So you were trying to make him comfortable? Yes. And put him at ease if you could? Yes. And did it appear to you, in observing his face, that he had been crying? Yes. Was he crying at the start of the interview? No. And the interview ended, I take it, before you actually meant it to? Yes, it did. You had more questions that you would have liked to have asked Eric Menendez that morning? Yes, ma'am. And was it his emotional condition that made it impossible to continue? Yes, it was. And would you describe his condition? You have given us some adjectives. Would it also be appropriate to say he appeared distraught? Yes, he did. Do you remember his body positions while you were interviewing him? Yes, I do. Can you describe it? He was not sitting directly across from me. He was one chair removed. The room has either 4 or 6 chairs, left, uh, but he was to my left and was seated in a chair, and he changed his body position frequently. He was moving around a lot? Yes, he was. Did that appear to you to indicate emotionality and agitation? So was he being emotional? Was he agitated? Objection, cause for speculation, sustained. Did he appear agitated? What's your definition of agitation? Mine doesn't matter, yours does. Did he appear physically uncomfortable? Periodically, yes. Did he appear emotionally uncomfortable? Yes, periodically. Did you see if he crossed his feet or crossed his legs? No, I wasn't in a position to see that. Did he bend his head forward or put his head in his hands? No, he didn't put his head in his hands, but he did bend his head forward. Did he lean on the table? I don't recall. At the point when you decided that you had to end the interview, he was sobbing, was he not? Yes, he was. Was his body shaking from the sobbing? Yes, he was. Now, is it a standard procedure when people are, well, at least when people are found no longer alive in their homes, is it standard to try to go through some of the obvious possibilities about who the perpetrators might have been? It's certainly my standard. All right, I do mean yours. Is one of the obvious possibilities that you need to deal with whether it was intruders, robbers, or burglars? Yes, ma'am. And in talking to particularly Lyle Menendez, did he indicate he didn't think that was a possibility, that there was nothing he could see that was missing? Well, I think that at the time I formed the opinion he had been in the house just a matter of minutes, and that wouldn't be a very rational conclusion to come to. So even if he was rational, he was not suggesting it was robbers, it was burglars, it was intruders. I'm not certain. I would have to look at the transcript, but I'm sorry, you can answer. I'm just going to get a piece of paper. Let me perhaps refresh your recollection. Do you remember his telling you, Mark, meaning Mr. Heffernan, the tennis coach? Do you remember him telling you that Mark, the tennis coach, thought perhaps it was robbery or burglary, but he, Lyle Menendez, didn't think so? I remember him saying that Mark suggested that, yeah. So even the burglaries weren't even Lyle's suggestions. All that was coming from was other people. Hmm. How these guys did not get manslaughter and were able to get out in like 15 years, I think, is the manslaughter. 15 to 20, maybe. They should have been out by now. They've been in prison for 35 years. They should have been out by now. I remember him saying that Mark suggested that, yeah, and he indicated he didn't think that. So you don't recall? Can we look and see? I'm looking. Let's let one of my many colleagues look through the transcript, while we move on for a minute, and we'll get back to that. You would consider as part of your procedure in the early stages of investigating a homicide, this robbery slash burglary, because robberies and burglaries are quite unfortunately common crimes, correct? That's correct. Often people have their lives taken in conjunction with robberies and burglaries and other thefts. Well, not usually in burglary, but robbery, yes. Well, robbery by definition means taking property of another person by force, right? Yes. Sometimes that force turns to lethal force. That's correct. And would another potential be, in circumstances similar to this, whether these folks whose lives have been taken, had enemies of any kind? Exactly. And an obvious potential source of enmity is business, correct? Correct. Where there's money, there's often antagonism. So they're saying like his enemies could be in business. Yes, ma'am. So it would be your routine in a case such as this to question people who knew the family and other members of the family about the nature of business contacts. Correct. So that was something clearly you were going to pursue? Yes, ma'am. And you did pursue it with Lyle Menendez. You asked a series of questions about it. Yes, sir. And he told you what you found out later to be true, that the company his father worked for had participated in a series of mergers over the previous few years, correct? I'm not sure they were mergers, but or takeovers. They bought up companies, yes. Well, the original company itself, did you learn, IVE, was a company owned by this person, Noel Bloom? Correct. And the company was bought by Carol Co., and then Mr. Bloom was shoved out? Correct. And there was some rumors or suggestions that Mr. Bloom might have had the wrong friends? Correct. And then you understood that IVE bought another company called Lieberman Enterprises, and then the name changed to Live? Live? Correct. And then you found out that this entity bought something called Strawberry Records? Exactly. And Strawberry Records was a company owned by a person named by Morris Levy? Yes, ma'am. And Morris Levy was a person known to the FBI as an organized crime connected person. That's correct. So, as the Beverly Hills Department looked into the nature of the companies that Mr. Menendez had been involved in purchasing, that's where the potential for an organized crime connection came from. Yes. And in fact, in various times in the investigation was efforts made to contact Mr. Bloom and Mr. Levy and other associates of theirs. This is interesting. This is getting into Jose's businesses and his meanderings and what nefarious stuff he might have been doing. So now another prong, if you will, of an inquiry or investigation in a situation like this where people are found no longer alive in their homes would have to do with whether or not it was family related? Yes. And if you had believed during the time that you were interviewing Eric and Lyle Menendez that they might be responsible, would you have taken other investigative steps that you did not, in fact, take that morning? Yes, ma'am. And would the first of those steps have been, or strike first, would one of those steps have been to conduct gunshot residue sampling of their hands? Yes. It is your understanding that if a person fires a gun, there will be some sort of mineral or chemical deposit on their hands from having done that? There can be, not will be. Can be, right. And it's certainly worth looking for. Yes, ma'am. And you would have been the person who was with them there at the station who would have requested that gunshot residue sampling be done if you had suspicions about them. That's correct. You made no such requests. No, ma'am. I want to go back for a moment since my colleague has looked this up for us to the reference that Lyle Menendez made about Mark Heffernan thinking it might be a robbery. And let me, if I could approach the witness, Your Honor, to refresh his recollection. The court says yes. Ms. Abramson says this is page 4, line 16 and 17 of the Lyle Menendez transcript. Why don't you just read the paragraph to yourself, Sergeant Edmonds? He does so. And from reading that paragraph, does it appear that Lyle Menendez indicates that Mark said it might be a robbery or something, but Lyle says it didn't look like that to him? Yes, ma'am. Now, after you turned the tape off at that point, when Eric Menendez was too distraught and emotional to go on, did you remain with him for some period of time? Yes, I did. And did you try to console him? Yes, I did. During the course of the questioning, when you indicated you were basically treating him as a victim witness, were you trying to make him cry or make him emotional, or were you trying to get information and not make him emotional? I was trying to get information. So we could hear you, and you were asking very straightforward questions. Is that a fair characterization? Yes, ma'am. But we can't see you by listening to the tape. So, were you doing anything to get him to be emotional, or were you trying to keep him under control? Just trying to get the information that I wanted. Okay. I wasn't trying either way to keep him under control or anything else. Do you, when it's appropriate for investigative purposes, try to get people to be emotional or upset as part of the technique? I don't. No. I'm going to highlight that right there and just say I call bull because most officers, especially ones who would have been, well into their career at this time, uh, would have been using things associated with the read technique, which uses a lot of pressure on a witness to try to, or a suspect to try to get them to crack and to make a confession. And the read technique is really good at getting confessions. Guilty people confess, but also innocent people do. So I call bull. on this guy. And so does Leslie. She says no. Now, you indicate that the whole interview with Erik, I think, took 20 minutes before you turned the tape off. Approximately, yes. And then you remained with him for some minutes. Probably 5 minutes, 3 to 5, I would say. All right, I am back up in my spot so I can record upstairs and put my camera back on. But yeah, let's just keep going. Sorry for the interruption. All right. So probably 5 minutes, 3 to 5, I would say. And then you escorted him back out to the lobby where he told Lyle that it was okay to talk to you because you were an okay guy? Yes. And you had been very kind to him, had you not? I think so. And obviously he thought so. I'm kind to everybody. I think so too. Now, after you interviewed, did you have any conversation with Eric Menendez before the interview that Lyle or with Lyle about whether they had to find some place to stay that night? Before the interview? Before the interview with Lyle, had you said anything to Eric about he might have to find a place to stay? I'm not certain. I don't think so. Afterwards, did you tell them or one of them that they could not? Did you tell them that you didn't want them to go back to the house, that they couldn't go back to the house for a couple of days? Yes, that's correct. It was Lyle that I told that to. And did he then ask you if it was okay if he stayed with Mark Heffernan? Yes, ma'am. Did you find that a little odd that he'd be asking your permission to stay at his tennis coach's house? Objection, irrelevant, sustained. Do you know why he was asking your permission? Objection calls for speculation, sustained. Did you indicate before that you needed to know where he would be at any and all times? I believe we did. And was he trying to tell you where he would be? Objection, tape speaks for itself. Overruled. You can answer the question. The witness says, I don't actually know why he asked my permission, and I did tell him that we needed to stay in touch, but I don't know why. I guess I'm a father figure. Or maybe, just maybe, Lyle was so used to asking for permission to breathe from his own father that he wanted to or he felt like he was compelled to ask for permission because he was just so used to it. That's what I would say. Ms. Abramson says, I guess. The witness says, I don't know. Now, did you, subsequent to the interview with Lyle Menendez that we just heard, have a brief interview with Mr. Heffernan? Well, I wouldn't call it an interview. It wasn't in an interview setting, but I spoke to him. Just a few words speaking to him? Yeah, as I recall, yes. And that was in the lobby area that you've described? In the lobby or adjacent to it? And did you take down information about his residence and telephone number? I may have. I don't actually recall that. And then, did you see Mr. Heffernan and the Menendez brothers leave? I think I did, yes. And it was after that you telephoned Perry Berman at his home in West Hollywood and woke him up? Yes, ma'am. And sometime after you telephoned Mr. Berman and woke him up, he came to the station? Yes, he did. And you had a tape recorded interview with him? Yes, I did. Did in any of the little bits of conversation that you had with either of the Menendez brothers that were not recorded, did either of them tell you that they had been upset when the ambulance people would not go into the house? I don't recall, no. Do you recall at the end of the conversation with Lyle Menendez, he's telling you how he's glad he spoke to you because he was unhappy with some other officer at the scene who tried to question him? Yes, I do remember that. Do you understand him to be indicating he was concerned that nobody would go into the house? Objection calls for speculation and hearsay. Sustained. How much longer do you think you'll be? The court asks. Ms. Abramson says, not much, but if the court wanted to take a recess at this point, the court says, well, we're going to take one this morning. I just wanted to know if you think it will be a few more minutes or just 1 or 2 minutes, or what do you think? Probably just 2 or 3 minutes. So let me just scan my notes. Perhaps I'm almost at the end. You've testified a number of times before, correct? Yes, I have. And there have been transcripts generated from all of them, the grand jury. Well, this particular case or other cases. This one, just this one. Yes, ma'am. I think you've testified in transcribed proceedings 3 times before today. Is that your recollection? I would agree with that. And have you reviewed the transcripts from the prior occasions of testifying? Well, actually, no. I hadn't had a chance to read all of them. There were too many, and I've been very busy. Okay. Okay. Do you know who Mo Angel is? Yes, I do. Was Mo Angel an officer with the Beverly Hills Police Department on August 21st, 1989? Yes, he was. Does he now work for another police agency? Yes, he does. Did you see Officer Angel in the company of the Menendez brothers when you first saw them at the police station that morning? Objection, irrelevant, overruled. You may answer the question. He was with them, yes. He introduced them to me. And did he also indicate to you who Mark Heffernan was, what his relationship to Eric and Lyle Menendez was? He may have. Was Mo Angel a patrol officer, an officer who would have had a patrol car at his as part of his gear, if you will? Yes. Thank you. I have nothing further. The court says any redirect. Mr. Khan says, yes, Your Honor, I may have one additional question to Detective Edmonds. I'll have to rewind the tape for that. So um, we're about to start redirect. But it looks like we're about to go into a recess. So let's skip a little bit forward. All right, this is now we're back. The court says something that counsel want to talk about before the jury comes in. Ms. Abramson says, we want to inquire what piece of tape it is that Mr. Khan felt he had the right to replay at this point. Mr. Khan says, there are 2 areas of the recordings that I would like to play. One is in regard to the Eric Menendez recordings, and the second is in regard to the Lyle Menendez recording. And both are areas in which, upon listening to those portions once again, the witness has indicated that the transcript is incorrect and corrections need to be made. Ms. Abramson says, well, Your Honor, the court's already told the jury that the transcript may not be accurate. We don't think it's appropriate to highlight any particular parts of that tape for that purpose. The court says, does it relate to areas that were covered on cross-examination? Mr. Khan says, yes. Ms. Abramson says, what? Mr. Khan says, the witness testified in regard to Lyle Menendez that he did not use the word organized crime during the interview, but there is an area of the transcript an area of the tape where it is apparent that he did use the word organized crime. Ms. Abramson says, where's? The court says, what else? Mr. Khan says, and the other area is in regard to Eric Menendez's statement where he indicates, at least the transcript says, my family has no enemies, but my dad does know a lot of friends. And in fact, what he is saying there is that my family has no enemies, but my dad doesn't have a lot of friends in his business. The court says, okay, that one we discussed yesterday at the break. Yes. Ms. Abramson says, well, I'm happy to stipulate to clarify that part of the Eric Menendez statement, but I didn't refer to it in my cross-examination at all. And with respect to the Lyle Menendez part, we'd like to know what they're talking about because we've had these tapes for 6 years. I don't believe we ever heard anything about organized crime. The court says, where is it that Lyle Menendez tape? In the Lyle Menendez tape. Mr. Khan says that is on page 9 of the transcript, line 17, where the words appear from 9 to 5. Upon listening to it closely, it's very clear that from 9 to 5 is not on recording. The words used there are organized crime. Ms. Abramson says, "Oh, please, come on, give me a break." The court says, "Let me ask the witness, did you listen to the tape?" "Yes, I did." "And what was your reaction now that you've heard it?" "I think it does say organized crime." Ms. Abramson says, "Oh, please." "Well, Your Honor," the court says, "Counsel, let's not have these, oh, please, oh my God, all the reaction on your part. It's highly unprofessional and you know it." Ms. Abramson says, "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but they have had," the court says, "regardless of how you're reacting to it, your reaction has to be done in a proper fashion. Now, if you can't do that, then you'll be appropriately dealt with." He's such an ass. These prosecutors can decide they're not going to call the witnesses that they say they're going to call, when they're going to call them. They can turn over discovery the day of a witness taking the stand. That morning, they turn it over. So the counsel doesn't have a chance to look at it. And none of that's a problem, really, to Judge Weisberg. He only cares that Leslie Abramson has strong opinions and she makes them known. I would have a hard time not making them known, especially in this case too. So I give her props for holding it back more so than I could. She's got restraint compared to me. All right, the court says, regardless of how you're reacting to it, your reaction has to be done in a proper way and dealt with appropriately if you don't. Okay. Ms. Abramson says, "We would object to this witness offering an opinion as to words that none of us have heard in 6 years that do not appear on the prosecution prepared transcript, which is in the evidence item here, and that we do not have an opportunity now, if they're going to make this claim, to send out to a sound lab the original to see if with any enhancement process we can prove or disprove what only the witness apparently can hear." The court says, "Well, this witness was present when the recording was made and he's listened to it and he's entitled to testify about it. He's been asked questions about the recording in detail and this is just his opinion." Ms. Abramson says, "But, Your Honor, he has testified about it and has listened to it on numerous prior occasions, and the defense, until right this moment before the jury, was never given notice that he has this information to add, and our entire cross-examination of him was based on the record as we understood it, as it had been given to us by the prosecution." So now you're going to go, like, after we've already done our cross-examination on the transcript and what we thought was transcribed and everything and what we heard, now the prosecution's going to go back and just change what they think they hear. It's not transcribed anywhere. It's never been testified to, but all of a sudden now he has the opinion that the words organized crime happen to be under the radar where nobody can hear it. This makes zero sense to me. And if this judge lets this in, I'm going to be furious. And this is already how we're starting out with the prosecution, and they're playing dirty tricks. Continuing on, "We think it is extremely unfair to allow him now to say he heard something that isn't on here when we have not had any opportunity to prepare to impeach him. If we have this tape enhanced and it isn't there and he were to testify, we could confront him with an enhanced tape." The court says, "You can always do that." Ms. Abramson says, "I can't do it now." The court says, "You can always do it before the trial is completed." So now it's her responsibility to bring him back up on the stand and impeach him later, is what the judge is saying, which that's not usually how it should work. It should be in order, but you know, whatever. This judge sucks. Ms. Abramson continues, "Well, I think it's totally inappropriate, Your Honor, for this to be brought up at this juncture, given the nature of our cross-examination, and for him to be permitted to say that he hears or remembers something 6 years later that he has not testified to, even though he has testified at 3 prior hearings. Never testified to it, never stated this before." The court says, "All right, the objection's overruled." What a freaking dick. Sorry, but he is. I don't like Judge Weisberg, and it's very apparent that he's got some some bias towards the defendants here. All right, Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, could we hear the tape before the jury comes out? Ms. Abramson says, could we hear it now? Mr. Levin says, we'd like to hear it. Perhaps there will be no dispute. Portion of the tape is played. Mr. Khan says, I think it's apparent that he's saying his business wasn't free from organized crime. Ms. Abramson says, that's ridiculous. Excuse me, Your Honor, I didn't hear that at all. Did the court hear that? The court says, it's not for me, it's for the witness to say. If that's what he feels about it, he's entitled to say his opinion. Wow. Wow. So he's allowed to speculate about it? Cool. Just unreal. Mr. Gessler, attorney for Lyle, says, Your Honor, I thought the court said it's for the jury to make out what those words are. He literally just said that. It's not for me, it's for the jury. Where did he say that? Missed it. Did the court? Oh, I highlighted it. Thought, okay, it's not for me, it's for the witness to say. So Mr. Gessler immediately goes, bam, Your Honor, I thought the court just said, like in literally the same sentence, it's not for me, it's for the witness to say. If that's what he feels about it, he's entitled to say his opinion. So it's for the witness to decide, or for the jury to decide. Where did he say that? I don't know. I guess that's not what he said. He's saying it's for the witness. Okay, so he's saying it's for the witness to decide, the judge. When no, it's really not. It is for the jury. They should be listening to it and making up their own minds about what they're hearing. And the witness shouldn't be trying to tell them, "Oh, that's what I heard." But this is what we have happening here. So Mr. Gessler says, Your Honor, I thought the court said it's for the jury to make out what the words are, and all the transcripts are simply aids. The court says, yes, but you're asking the witness all sorts of questions about what someone said on the tape, and he answers it. Mr. Gessler says, and he answered them that he never said organized crime. The court says, well, now he's going to say otherwise, apparently. Mr. Gessler says, well, the court says, then you can impeach him and cross-examine him. Mr. Gessler says, based on becoming some kind of an expert witness on what he hears on a tape over the jurors who have the final word as to what the tape is. The court says, this is just his evidence, his testimony. Again, the jury is the final judge of what's on the tape. He's certainly able to answer the question being posed of him. Ms. Abramson says, I think the court, though, has to decide whether or not any piece of evidence is reliable. And given the fact that he never followed up if that's what Lyle Menendez had said to him about organized crime, Sergeant Edmonds' next question has nothing to do with what do you mean organized crime? What organized crime? What was the nature of his business? None of those things are asked following that particular part, leading one to logically conclude that that could not be what he heard there. Or he certainly, as we've brought out from cross-examination, the whole purpose of asking about business and enemies is for just that kind of information. But there's absolutely no follow-up if that's what he had heard. There's no interruption and there's no follow-up. And on the very next page, Lyle Menendez is talking about how legitimate the business was. The court says, well, that's all good cross-examination, but it doesn't mean that he can't testify to it. Ugh. All right, let's have the jury out, he says. Mr. Gessler says, I would ask the court to re-instruct the jury at the end of his testimony that they are the final judge of what the tape says. The court says, I'll certainly do that unless the witness testifies he has an independent recollection of the particular statement separate and apart from it, which he's entitled to do if he does. So basically, you just gave the prosecutor an out of that jury instruction by asking and formulating questions to make it seem that way. And I don't even know if the witness is in the courtroom. The witness might be there, so the witness might even know, oh good, I can weasel it in somehow by saying that that's what I remember hearing now. now, years later, after never testifying to it or anything. Do you see the dirty tricks that prosecutors play? All right, so the court is saying that the jury is all back and will resume with the examination of the witness. This is redirect with Mr. Khan asking the questions. All right, Detective Edmonds, during the recess, did I direct your attention to two portions of the tape recordings? One of the tape recordings of the Erik Menendez interview and another place in the tape recording of the Lyle Menendez interview? Yes, sir. And did you note any areas after listening to those portions of the tape where some corrections or modifications can be made to the transcripts? Yes, ma'am. Wait, I thought Mr. Khan is asking the questions. Why do you say ma'am? No, okay. He said sir here and then ma'am. Maybe that's a typo or something, or maybe the transcriber misheard. I don't know. I would like to direct your attention first to a portion of the transcript concerning the Erik Menendez interview. Your Honor, I would ask that we redistribute those transcripts to the jury so that the jury can follow along. The court says, all right, that's Exhibit 91. Mr. Khan continues his questioning, and I would like to direct your attention and the attention of the jury to page 3 of that transcript. And I would like to direct your attention specifically to the response to the question that appears on line 2. Do you have any ideas who may have done this? The transcript at this time reflects, no, my family has no enemies, but my dad does know a lot of friends. But, in his business, my brother may know. Can you, after listening to that tape recording, do you see a modification that can be made to that response? Yes, on line 3, after the first comma and the words enemies, it says, but my dad does know a lot of friends. I think it's actually, in reality, says does have a lot of friends or something very similar to that. Okay, I would like to, at this time, play that portion of the tape for you so that we can listen to that question and that answer once again. Mr. Khan said, okay, it was played. Mr. Khan says, at this time, I would like to now redirect your attention. First of all, I would like you to, if you would, mark your transcript to the modification that you indicated. Miss Abramson says, well, Your Honor, I'm going to object to changing the exhibit at this time. We have the witness's testimony and we have the juror's ears, and I don't think that the courts already instructed the transcripts, not the evidence, so I see no point in changing it. The court says, well, he can modify the transcript that he has. That's not the court exhibit at this point. Well, then what's the point? Okay. Okay, Judge Weisberg. Okay. Miss Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. The court says it's just the transcript. So at least it's not going into evidence. So at this point, although it probably will. Who knows? This judge is so crooked. Not as crooked as Canoni in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, or Judge Gull in Delphi, but he's still pretty I wouldn't say he's corrupt. Like Canoni and Gull are absolutely corrupt. I think, excuse me, trying to fix my screen here. I think that Judge Weisberg is just very biased and kind of blinded by his own perception of right and wrong. I think, especially in this case. I've never watched him preside over any other case, so I really have no experience other than this. I just calling it like I see it. All right, so Mr. Khan says, I would like to direct your attention now to the interview with Lyle Menendez and direct your attention specifically to page 9 of that transcript. I would like to direct your attention. How many times do I direct your attention? To line 17 of that transcript, which at the present time reads, his business worked, and then there were a series of asterisks followed by the words from 9 to 5. It's line 18. It should be 17. Is it 17 on your transcript? No, it's 18 on this one. Mr. Levin says it's 18 on yours. Uh-oh. Pause in proceedings. Uh-oh. We got to look at the transcripts and make sure that they're right. Okay, Mr. Khan continues. Let me direct your attention to the words on the tape. His business worked from 9 to 5. Did you listen to that portion once again on the tape recording? Yes, sir, I did. Did you see some modifications that can be made to that transcript? Yes, I do. I think the 9 to 5 should be taken out. And what words should appear in its place? Organized crime. Those two, 9 to 5, organized crime, those don't even sound the same. I'll play that portion of the recording for you at this time. Played again, or that portion was played again. Mr. Khan says, all right, once again, I would ask you to write on that transcript that's in front of you the words organized crime. He says, I did. Mr. Khan says, thank you. No further questions. Oh boy. Recross by Lyle's team, Mr. Charles Gessler. Sergeant Edmonds, is today the first time you've ever heard that tape? No, sir. So you heard it played before the grand jury, didn't you? I don't recall if I heard it at the grand jury or not. Had you heard it before you testified at the grand jury at some time? I believe I heard it before, but I'm not certain whether it was played at the grand jury. When you heard it before, did you tell the district attorney there needs to be any other changes to it or the transcript was inaccurate? No, I didn't. And you heard this tape played before the first trial in this case, didn't you? Yes. At the trial there. And you had a transcript at that time? Yes, sir. Same one that you've used here, didn't you? I don't know if it's the same one. All right. Did you hear any changes that you thought should be made in the transcript in the first trial, in the first time in that trial? And any changes concerning this word organized crime that you've just inserted in your copy? No, not concerning that word. Impeached. Okay. So you didn't tell the district attorney, gee, I think there should be a change there, did you, at this first trial? No. And then you heard the tape recording again this morning? Yes, I did. And you testified before the tape was played that you felt the transcript was accurate? Yes. So the same day he says, yes, this transcript's accurate. Then he comes back on the stand for the prosecutor and says, oh, by the way, I think they're saying organized crime there instead of 9 to 5. I call bull. And then you listen to the tape before the same jury here? Correct. And as you listened to that tape, did you tell the district attorney, gee, I think there's a mistake here? No. And then when I questioned you, we talked about the tape again, didn't we? Yes. And I asked you if at any time Lyle Menendez had mentioned the words organized crime. Didn't I? Yes. And you said no, he did not. Correct. So he literally testified earlier today he did not hear the words organized crime anywhere in his interview with Lyle Menendez, and yet here he is changing his testimony saying, I heard the words organized crime. Same day. On the stand, same day. Like, this makes no sense. I'm getting annoyed. Okay. And the first time that anyone told you, gosh, I think there's a mistake, was at the recess when Mr. Khan told you that? Yes. Bam, mic drop. I think we're done here. Excellent, excellent questioning by Mr. Gessler. All right. And Mr. Khan said, I think we should listen to that again. I think the words organized crime are here. Yes, he did. Where did he play that tape for you then? In court. Wasn't it some specifically enhanced room with special effects to bring out a tape or anything like that? Not unless that's what these devices here are. So the same device that we have here. Right. At that point, for the first time, you said, yeah, I guess so? Well, if you stand directly adjacent to the speaker, I think you might make that same conclusion. Really? So it's because we're not close enough to the speaker that we can't hear the words. Okay, cool. Now he's covering for his lie that he literally just said on the stand. So there's that. Mr. Kessler says, I'll move that that be stricken as a conclusion of the witness, Your Honor. Court says sustained, the answer stricken. Mr. Kessler says the speaker is where it is now. Yes, but I was at a different location? When? When I heard the tape during break? Oh, sorry, that was the answer. Let me back up. So Mr. Gessler says the speaker is where it is now. Yes, but I was at a different location. When? When I heard the tape during break. But at the time that it was played for the jury, you were right there where you are now, weren't you? Correct. So, what? He heard it during break? So he did hear it during break in the same spot. Okay, correct. Conversation that you were having on page 9 of the transcript. This was about his father getting phone calls at night. This is just above when this is just above when he said his business work from 9 to 5 on the transcript. Yes, on line 14. And he talks about it as it talks about it was unusual. He never used to take phone calls at night. He'd take them out at night now, and then they do a lot more traveling, a lot more lunches and things like that. Yes, sir. So there's no mention in that particular paragraph of organized crime, is there? No, sir. And then we have his business worked either from 9 to 5, or what's the context you put organized crime into this? What words did you change? I would take out 9 to 5, which rhymes with organized crime. No, it doesn't. From 9 to 5 rhymes with organized. Well, when you listen to that tape at a close proximity, you can actually hear it. Yes. That is what you say you've heard. Yes. And you've heard organized crime rhymes with from 9. Is that what you're telling me? 9 to 5. When it's said on the tape, if you're listening from a correct position, you can hear that it's actually, instead of digits, it's words. What? Well, were the words from organized crime? No, just organized crime. So the word from wasn't in the sentence. Not from 9 to 5. So the word from that's in the transcript must be wrong then? Is that what they're saying? He says from, no, just the words organized crime. So what you've heard now is his business work organized crime. That's in the portion of it I would change. That's that the word from was in line, yes. Okay. Does it read his business work from organized crime? Yes, it says from him organized crime. Something to that effect if you listen to the tape. All right. So it's his business worked from organized crime. Right. And it also makes better sense in the context of the next line if you read the next line. From organized crime, and then he says, I could see how he could step on a lot of toes. Exactly. That makes better sense than from 9 to 5. From organized crime? What did you take that to mean? The court says, you're asking at the time of the conversation, or Mr. Gessler says, now that he's changed it and says it makes better sense. Now that it makes better sense, how does the from organized crime make sense? Well, the pressure possibly from organized crime. Are the words pressures in there? No, but he said in the context of the conversation, he was talking about the takeovers of these other businesses, and it makes sense that that might be what he was referring to, organized crime. So you just go from taking over businesses to all of a sudden, like, you take that magic leap to organized crime? Seriously? Okay. But the context on this page is talking about going out at night, taking calls, and his business worked. right? That's the context in which his words is now being changed. That's what you're saying, yes. Well, that's what the page said, isn't it? Yes, it does. And that's what the tape said, isn't it? That's what you're saying the tape says. I think it says organized crime. So, well, does the tape, according to you, say, his business worked? Are you changing that also? Or is that what the tape said as you heard it? Well, I would suggest you play the tape again. You can play it again, was the question. Mr. Khan says, and that was coming from Miss Gessler, says you can play it again. And then Mr. Khan says, I will play the tape at this time. So it was played again. So how many times do they get to play this stupid portion over and over again in court? Which is them trying to prejudice the jury against the brothers. All right, so Mr. Gessler continues. Now, did you hear it say, his business worked basically from 9 to 5? No, I heard it sounded like to me organized crime. So his business worked basically from organized crime? Okay. All right. And it sounded after the word worked. His business worked from organized crime. I'm not certain the word from is there. He just said it was. This guy is wishy-washy on his answers here, if you haven't noticed. It's more likely it could be an instead of from. You mean his business worked organized crime? That's what it sounded like. So once he said that, you followed up on it, right? I didn't follow up on anything that evening, only was taking information. Well, is the information you were taking, you were trying to find out what leads he could give you, weren't you? Yes, sir. And the leads that you wanted were like people that his father was involved with, right? Correct. And when if he said organized crime, wouldn't you immediately jump in and say, wow, what organized crime? Who? Not necessarily. You let the conversation flow. If you listen to the entire tape, I ask very few questions. I was trying to be a recipient. And what were you trying to be a recipient of? Of information. And what kind of information were you trying to receive? Anything I could that would lead to the solution of the crime. So asking a follow-up question about organized crime is not going to help you? Okay. Ay, ay, ay. After you let the conversation flow for approximately 7 more pages, then did you say, gosh, Lyle, you mentioned something about organized crime. Let's talk about that. No, because I knew that we had the information. We would be able to uncover that ourselves anyway. Okay. Very confident in their capabilities without asking or investigating things. They can just find stuff out anyway. You didn't get any names from Mr. Menendez, from Lyle Menendez, of who this organized crime would be? No. And you didn't ask him about any associates of his father who might have been in organized crime, did you? I believe I asked him if you have any idea who could be responsible throughout the whole thing. Did you ever? To tell me. Did you ever ask him who in organized crime he was talking about? No, I didn't ask him specifically who in organized crime. I asked him if he had any ideas who did it. So you asked that at the very beginning, didn't you? And I believe at the end as well. But my question is, did you ever ask him about anybody specifically in organized crime that he might have in mind? No, I didn't. Or any companies in organized crime that he might have in mind? No, I didn't. So basically, you were talking about his work schedule. You were talking about when Mr. Menendez comes home, when he takes phone calls, and all of a sudden there's this phrase that you now say organized crime is there. I believe that's what it said. And the next page, being page 10, you have that there too, don't you? Yes, sir. And down around lines 15 and 16, you see the part where it says he'd squeeze out a lot of weaker people. Do you see where I am now? Yes. What's the next line? What did he say next? Everything was legit. Everything was honest. So in the same context of what they're talking about. He never said why would he say organized crime and everything was legit? His businesses were legit. Two conflicting things, right? I mean, this is a really good recross from Charles Gessler. I'm impressed. And I don't say that often about him because he doesn't do a whole lot of, well, he does a lot of the questioning, but he doesn't impress me much. So far, this is really good, I think. All right, so now are you changing what he said there too, or is that what the tape says? Well, no, his business could be honest. I didn't say he was in organized crime. I said the word organized crime came up. That makes no sense. And then when Lyle Menendez said, but he was, everything was legit, everything was honest, this came after you say he said the words organized crime, right? Correct. And instead of asking him, gosh, what do you mean? You just said organized crime a couple of minutes ago. You said he was born in the United States, referring to his father, right? Correct. And you didn't follow up at all at any point regarding organized crime or associates or anything, did you? Or what about international ties? No. And I also didn't follow up on the fact that it could have been a Cuban connection. That was what I was just thinking. That politically took him out. This stuff you can find out later on in your investigation. So he also didn't follow up on the fact that it could have been a Cuban connection. So again, international affairs might have been something to look into, but that never came up because organized crime never came up. So none of it was asked in his interview. So you weren't trying to get more information about that organized crime aspect at all from Mr. Menendez, who was there talking to you? No, you're correct. I wasn't. Mr. Gessler says, thank you. Nothing further. The court says anything on behalf of Eric Menendez. Ms. Abramson says, no, Your Honor, because, like I said, that was a great re- recross from Mr. Gessler. So cheers, Mr. Gessler. That was beautifully done. That is how you impeach a witness. And Ms. Abramson, as you know, who loves to get up and argue. Well, I don't know if she loves it, but she was really good at it. She's got nothing further for Eric's team. So that says a lot. That says she's quite confident in Mr. Gessler's impeachment of Sergeant Edmonds. So that is the conclusion of Sergeant Edmonds' testimony. The court says, "Okay, thank you, sir. You may step down." The witness says, "Thank you." The court asks, "Who is your next witness?" Mr. Khan says, "Clara Wright, Your Honor." And we will get to Clara Wright's testimony in the next episode. We're actually going to read through Clara Wright and Randolph Wright. Neither of these two were called in the first trial. So if you're looking at the screen, I have it highlighted here. Clara and Randolph. We're going to be going through their testimony for the next episodes or episode. I'm going to try to squeeze it into one. It's going to be a longer one, but we'll get it done. And also, what was I going to say? So they are the parents of Billy Wright. Billy Wright was a friend of the brothers. And Randolph and Clara, Billy, I believe, played tennis with the brothers. And so Randolph and Clara came over to the home on August 21st, 1989, to pick up the tennis rackets that she was borrowing or whatever. They were picking up tennis rackets and spoke with the brothers the day after the homicide. So they're going to talk about, their interactions with the brothers and how that all went down once the brothers were back at the house and no longer being interviewed at the police station. So, and once they were allowed to come back to the house. So that is where I will leave you for this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments below what you guys are thinking about trial 2. How are you liking this, or how are you, in your mind, how are you comparing it? I think I'm really seeing the prosecutorial overreach a lot more this time around, in my opinion, and I'm going to try to point it out as much as possible. And the judge, being a biased judge, I'm going to point it out as much as I possibly can because I think it's important. And it really goes to also with Nathan Hockman's latest, calling into the brothers, calling into their credibility into question. It really goes to help us to understand how the trial went and how the brothers didn't get a fair shake by seeing this shadiness by the prosecution. What they just did with Sergeant Edmonds was beyond possibly unethical, but beyond, like normal ethics of normal rules of using law. I think that they instead of trying to get to the truth and trying to get answers, they're trying to push for a conviction. In my opinion, that is not how it should be done. We should be searching for truth and justice rather than just convicting somebody for a crime that you think some alleged injustice. When, if you think about it, who is receiving that injustice in the end? So the people who were the perpetrators, the abusers, are now gone, and putting their victims away for life doesn't give the entire situation justice. The entire circumstances of the brother situation and everything all combined, you have to look at it all. And um, doing this, going through the transcript has been really, not just the transcript, but the first trial has been eye-opening to me in how uh, court systems work and how sometimes we're not actually getting to the truth. So I will leave you with that note. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care. Please hit that like button on the way out for me, and I will see you guys in the next one with Clara and Randolph Wright. See you guys. Bye now.